Only a few lifetimes ago, the world was in shambles. Fire had rained down from the sky and the great flood was unleashed. Mankind was brought to the verge of extinction. According to the great tradition, giants were in the earth in those days, and the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and it grieved the Great One, the God of gods, who had once created man from dust, and so sought to destroy those who had fallen away. The tradition witnesses a flood destroying all creation, save for a chosen few who preserved their righteousness, only for their descendants to fall into the same pattern of wickedness. To keep his promise to lay down his bow and to never destroy creation in such a way ever again, the Lord of Spirits withdrew and placed distance between himself and man. In his place, he divided mankind into nations and appointed angels to watch over them. But one thing led to another, and they too fell away. As it is written, the gods of the nations are demons. In the traditional mainline interpretation of history that can be found in the textbooks of the modern day, there is a story that goes something like this. Mankind populated the world along trails of game as they followed a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, hunting down animals for meat and gathering berries and nuts and the like for their sustenance. And so humanity struggled all around the world for over 100,000 years. And that's only if we're being exclusive to Homo sapiens. However, as the climate warmed around the time of the Holocene climactic optimum, as the weather became warmer and the Ice Age came to a close, the gatherers of the nomadic societies wandering in more fertile areas would notice that their cache of gathered berries, seeds, and grains would fall to the ground and, if left to their devices or buried underground, sprout into plants that bore the same fruit or what have you. With food now a growable, producible good, the hunter-gatherers gradually began to keep themselves in the proximity of these early farming grounds, even using their food to domesticate livestock and other animals that typically would have been hunted. The hunter-gatherers transitioned into agricultural society in the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 years ago. This sustainable food source led to population growth and the creation of more leisure time in which members of the society could learn valuable skills such as building homes, weapons to defend territory, and so on. Such large-scale projects required the creation of hierarchies with the emergence of an elite class within sedentary society. All the while, because food supplies relied on the weather and soil conditions, people began to see their world as driven by sentient, intelligent spirits. Spirits of rain, spirits of the rivers, spirits of agriculture, and so began religion. That myth is no longer sustainable. In a time before writing, before what we know as society, indeed before the first seeds were arrayed and planted in the Fertile Crescent, before the Holocene climatic optimum even began, the world was in the closing gasps of the Ice Age. It was approximately 11,600 years ago. The terrain was torn. Most of the megafauna that were enjoyed by the hunter-gatherers were gone. And yet, a large group of men were putting themselves to work in southeastern Anatolia, north of Syria, and in the plains not far from the base of the mountains of Ararat. Muscles ached as they dragged massive 18 to 20 feet limestone pillars with inscriptions of animals and men that weighed in the tons for miles. For all that work, what was their destination? It was none other than a site in the middle of nowhere, miles away from fertile ground that would become Neolithic settlements in the future, far from any water source. And despite having the time to drag these intricately carved pillars from far off, after all, the wheel had not yet been invented, these men were not farmers. These men were, far as we can tell, hunters. Eventually, the site was built up with different enclosures, likely for different but related purposes. Hundreds of people were involved in the construction and use of the site, an impressive amount for such a time period. Indeed, much about this site, known as Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill, breaks a lot of dogmas of modern mainstream history. The site shows clear signs of a specialized division of labor, intensely skilled artistry with three-dimensional sculpting, deliberate engineering, and an understanding of the movement of the stars as the site marks certain astrological patterns. While it sits on a commanding position over fertile plains, the dating of Göbekli Tepe tells us one crucial thing. It was built before the agricultural revolution. What could have driven these hunter-gatherers to spend so much crucial time in a place like this, partaking in such difficult work? Was hunting and gathering just too easy? No. And that's the most fascinating thing about Göbekli Tepe. It is very clearly a religious and ritualistic site. A religious site that predates agriculture. Because Göbekli Tepe smashes dogmatic mainstream history with a sledgehammer, it has become the topic of much controversy and reinterpretation. But the fact of the matter is, for all intents and purposes, Göbekli Tepe debunks the idea that religion was a product of agriculture. On the contrary, it appears agriculture, that is, society and civilization itself, was built around religion. While Göbekli Tepe contradicts mainstream secular history, if we contextualize Göbekli Tepe and the archaeology around it with the stories passed down through the great tradition of our ancestors, the site becomes less enigmatic. It could be that at some point, a group of hunter-gatherers, or perhaps one individual, encountered something at the site. A god, perhaps, or gods. And after frequent miraculous or spiritual events taking place at the site, the land became known as a sort of holy ground to those who had forgotten the name of their maker. Over time, the area of Göbekli Tepe became a pilgrimage site, garnering a name for itself as a center of knowledge. And as people came to the site to worship and to pray, agriculture itself became necessary for food for the pilgrims. Demanding more worship, perhaps this spirit or spirits taught their worshippers some things, information that man was not yet ready for. As they engaged in their rituals, perhaps the worshippers were taught to plant a seed. And from there, everything went downhill. Ritualistic worship continued in the region until 8000 BCE, aligning with the spread of the agricultural revolution across the Fertile Crescent. As agriculture seemingly outpoured across the region, Göbekli Tepe itself was buried, seemingly on purpose, though there are those who contest this idea. In its over 1,000-year-long use, one can only imagine what took place at Göbekli Tepe. As of 2021, only 5% of the site had been excavated, as the archaeological team is focusing on preserving and targeting small samples of the whole. Beginning as a prehistoric think tank and center of innovation, with perhaps a resident elite, many people gathered underneath the pseudo-priesthood class to learn. But as time goes on, the site degenerates. One can note that the more intricate statues are of the lower level, while higher and more recent levels of Göbekli Tepe before its burial shows statues of lesser quality. Today, there are many ideas about Göbekli Tepe, a remnant of an ancient civilization, the ever-present alien theory, the least likely theory that Göbekli Tepe was created by farmers from the start. I think, dear viewer, that Göbekli Tepe is one of the most important archaeological pieces to the puzzle of early man in the days after the cataclysm that destroyed so much. I think that Göbekli Tepe was a taste of what was to come, a taste of the consequences of the falling of the nations.
Yeah, got me in this party all up in the zone. Hottest Betty's trying to take away my cell phone. Like, come and party, I've been trying to shake you off my mind, but just can't get you off me. Keep it moving, they ain't worth it, yeah, that's what my father taught me. But for now, I'm going through the motions of letting go. Cause my mind's telling me yes, but my heart really don't know. Your heart went dark out of nowhere, yet I still